All right, moving on. Detroit's emergency manager Kevyn Orr marks 1 year on the job. He spoke a few times this week in the media and 2 policy forums about the goal of reform in the city. Bottom line, getting through the bankruptcy process to make Detroit livable for the residents.
From time to time, I'll drive around the city in the afternoon and see what it was. So one week the pile was there, the next week it was gone. The second week I came back when it was gone, the gentleman across who owned the house across the street, and this is in the middle of winter, was out painting his shutters. So I stopped just to talk to him. I said, "Hey, how you doing?" "Oh, you're the guy on TV." I said, yeah, I'm that guy. I didn't know if he was going to, maybe he was going to hit me, whatever. He didn't like me so much. He came over and hugged me. And he said, "Thank you for taking that garbage up." The sense of civic pride in the fact that his neighborhood, just that little thing was moving, was causing him to invest in his community.
Orr is operating on a time frame, of course. His 18-month term is up in September. The question of the grand bargain to save art from the DIA and offset pension cuts is still out there, and time is running out to close that deal. Before we talk about that, the grand bargain, before we talk about now that he's putting out, asking for bids for privatization for the water department, I want you guys to give him a grade. Let's give him the 1-year report card grade. Daniel, what do you think?
I'd give him an A- to B+.
Oh, but it's so important to try to shift that. When you got a B+ in school, you're like, what's the one thing?
Kids in college would freak out. Kids in college all think they should get A's all the time.
They should.
What's the one thing I could have done to boost that up to an A-?
He didn't understand the politics of Detroit. He did not understand, and he when we interviewed him, I think a week ago or 10 days ago, he acknowledged that he did not appreciate how political this process was going to be and how confrontational it was going to be. The other thing that he acknowledged is that he spent a lot of time re-studying the problems that the governor and the Treasury Department had already done. And he said, I should have not spent that time. I should have just taken what they had done, because essentially his time confirmed what they had already done.
Right.
And he wasted time.
Did it surprise you that he didn't realize how political this process was? Because I think probably 25 people could have told him that. Or is it something that you have to wait until you are in that position before you can realize it?
I think you do have to understand it. And Detroit's political environment is in some ways very unique around the country.
Yeah.
And remember, this is a guy who spent 30-some years practicing law for a white shoe law firm at a very high level. This is not the kind of stuff that he did on a daily basis. He didn't do Chapter 9s. He hadn't been involved in this kind of stuff. He knew bankruptcy and does know bankruptcy, and I think he knows what he's doing. But the politicization of the process, which to Steve and I is what we deal with every morning when we get out of bed.
Correct.
For a lot of people around the country, by the way, it is foreign, and it's very difficult for people to understand in this day and age that we're still fighting these battles with these kinds of tools, but that's what we're doing.
All right, give me the grade.
I think I'd go B+ for the same reasons. I mean, I think, and I had a conversation with Kevyn when he got here about what it was like here and how different it would be from anything that he'd seen in Washington. And I said, the thing that you will not understand is the presumption of bad faith, that that no matter what you do, no matter what you say, there is a certain percentage of the population here, and it shifts depending on the issue, who's in that percentage, who just assume that you're here for for nefarious reasons, and you won't be able to win them over with reason or fact. It's emotional, and I think he heard me when I said that. But again, it's one thing to hear someone say that to you. It's another thing to see it day after day after day after day, and he has over the last year, and I think he's adjusting. I think he's...
Has he learned to handle it enough that he's going to be able to accelerate and move through the process that he has to do now until September?
Well, I don't think it's gotten in his way at all. I mean, I think it's made things more rancorous than they had to be. He might have avoided some of the things that he said throughout the process if he'd been thinking more about that presumption of bad faith. But think how quickly we've moved through this process. I mean, we're almost at the point where we're talking about wrapping this this up. We filed bankruptcy on June 1st last year?
July 18th. July 18th.
So we're not even close to a year yet. Most cities that have gone through this process have not even come up with the certification that they could go into bankruptcy at this point. They're still fighting the creditors who are trying to keep them out of court. So,
all right, so the details are starting to get closer, and we're starting to get closer in the process. But Daniel, you wrote a column this week talking about the grand bargain and how now the time is really accelerating, and Orr needs to get this done in terms of saving the art and offsetting the pension cuts. How close are we? The foundations are still on board, but what is it going to take to close this deal?
Well, the foundations are very much on board. I think the real question hanging out there is what the state legislature is going to do. I mean, Kevyn Orr is essentially in a selling mode right now, saying we've got $815 million. You have to understand how unusual this is in a bankruptcy, that real fresh money comes into the process to essentially cushion the blow. And if we don't get this deal done, that money disappears. Well, the foundations are there. They've made their commitment, and that commitment, I think, is going to stay unless this thing ultimately falls apart. So really what this all hinges on is whether the governor and the Republican leadership in the legislature can deliver the $350 million. And if they can, then we may see this happen. The problem is the governor and the Republicans say they want to see the unions and the pension funds make a move, and the unions and the pension funds are not going to make a move until they know that that full $815 million is going to be there. And oh, by the way, they need guarantees.
It sounds like a bad game of chicken, so who moves first?
I don't know, but what I do know is the legislature has got to move while it's in session.
yes.
So what we're being driven by is not so much the bankruptcy judge's calendar, which is also unspooling as this goes on, but really by the legislative calendar.
The legislator, yeah.
And whether they're going to be able to put that thing together. And I tell you what, if this thing falls apart and that legislative money goes away, I think you see the DIA benefactors move to the sidelines a little bit,
Yeah.
and the foundations will say, you know, yeah, we raised $350-some million, but that's not going to be enough, and it's not going to happen, and the whole thing falls apart, and then people get a worse settlement, which is part of his argument.
So the governor said basically if this doesn't happen by May, is this what we're looking at, about the end of May?
Mm-hmm.
I've said for a while, Mackinac, right?
But by the time we hit the Mackinac Policy
By the time we get to
Conference,
the Mackinac Policy Conference, this governor has always made a point of having the budget wrapped up by that point, because after that, you know, the legislature leaves for the summer, pretty much, and so I think that weekend. Or that week this year could be where you see all of this stuff sort of furiously
a lot of work
coming to a head. But at least
start writing, guys.
Everybody's together. I mean, I think that's one of this may be where the policy conference proves its value. You've got everybody up on an island. They can't. You know,
they can't dodge you, and there's no car that they can get into and drive away quickly.
And say, we got to get this hammered out.
Okay, real quick before we leave this topic, Kevyn Orr is also now looking for bids for privatizing, the water department, and he wants to keep it to only a 4% increase for how many years? Was it that 10? He said for about?
I think it was about 10.
10 years. Is that a good enough? Is that a good deal?
Who knows? I mean, you know, the people in Oakland County think this is just a negotiating tactic to try and pressure them to the table, and I think in part it's probably true.
Yeah.
You know, Kevin does have a responsibility to try and extract some kind of value, but the problem he's going to run into here is you can't extract value from people that are already rate paying. And essentially saying, you know, we need you to be a revenue stream for the city of Detroit. That is politically a loser in
and that's the tragedy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the inability of people in the region to take responsibility for what is our water system, right? We all agree that this is not just an asset of the city of Detroit, but the access to that kind of fresh water and things like that is a regional asset. And the idea that we would even think about turning that over to even a private operator, let alone selling it, I just think is crazy.
Well, it may be ours, but the issue I think that they have is if you want to charge us $47 million a year for 40 years, put the $47 million into the capital improvements. Don't put it into the general fund.
But some of
those are two different things.
Right, but a lot of the money that would be generated by this deal would go into the capital improvements. So there's a whole plan for fixing the system. But Detroit should get something for giving up an asset.
All right.